string of pearls. It's a wonderful, beautiful succulent. It's also one of the types of Senecio, and I've been growing string of pearls for many years, and I wish I had known this while growing a string of pearls. So I'm going to share with you the tips and what I've learned during my gardening journey to help you grow your string of pearls. And these tips also help to grow other Senecio types, which are like string of watermelon, string of dolphins, string of banana, string of beans, string of tears, and also things like ruby red necklace as well. If you're finding that your string of pearls, the actual pearls, which are the actual leaves of the succulent, if you're finding they don't look plump, they look more flat, then there's two scenarios that could cause it. It's either underwatering or overwatering. And you might be thinking, oh gosh, Min, that's just so confusing that it's actually underwatering or overwatering. They're like complete opposite causes. Well, first of all, to tell is that if it's from underwatering, it's more of a slow process. So the actual plump sort of leaves, the pearls, will actually become more limp, less plump, less full, more flat in a slower process. And when you do water the succulent again, over the next 3 days, those actual pearls will plump up again and become full and juicy again. If it doesn't occur, it can be from the actual fact that the plant has been in a drought condition for far too long, and what has happened is some of the roots, or a lot of the roots, have maybe died, and so the plant still can't access the water even when you re-water the plant. So definitely check the root system just to make sure that the roots are healthy. If the roots look healthy and the actual pearls are just looking limp and flat, just re-water your plant and the pearls will actually plump up again. Now, if it's from overwatering and those pearls have actually become limp and flat, first of all, it's generally the actual pearls will tend to be also feel a bit more mushy as well, or kind of like a texture like as if it's starting to rot. Also, it's a lot faster process because overwatering is one of the quickest way to kill a succulent, and really it's one of the quickest way to kill any sort of plant. And you'll notice that even when you let the soil dry and then you re-water it, those pearls, they don't plump up again. It's most likely what's happened is that the plant has undergone overwatering, the roots have actually died, and there's actually root rot happening, and so the plant, even though you re-water it again, it's still not gaining the actual water, and so those pearls are not plumping up, and you'll notice a quick decline in your plant. With this is occurring, once again, you want to check the actual roots, and most likely you're going to see some root rot happening. And root rot, what it looks like is the roots are not whitish in color anymore. They're kind of like a browny black color. They're kind of very soft and mushy, like rotten food, kind of like that soft mushy sort of texture, and also has a funky smell coming out of it. If you do see that, then it needs to be repotted. It also, those dead roots need to be cut away. Wash the roots as well, and also dip it into rooting powder just to help the plant grow new roots faster. Now, if you're noticing that the actual pearls, the spacing between the pearls, so the spacing between the leaves is getting longer, so those pearls are not tightly on the stems, they're actually a longer space between it, it means that the plant is actually searching for more light. And that's why the distance between the actual pearls is getting longer. If you're noticing this, the easiest way to fix it is to put your string of pearls in the area where it's receiving a lot more sunlight. So in the household, I found that for my string of pearls to actually grow, I really need to put it into a south-facing window where it's receiving indirect sunlight in the morning, but also full sunlight in the daytime. and it's also right next to the window to allow it to gain as much access to sunlight as possible. I found that if I placed it into a medium light and definitely in a low light, it doesn't do well at all. Also, what you can do, if you're noticing that, also you find that you can also use a grow light to help give it additional light, to give it as much light as possible, and you'll notice that the next lot of growth, the actual spacing between those pearls become more tighter. If you're noticing that your pearls, those leaves, they're not big, they're like tiny little pearls, well, it could be just the type of the string of pearls. I mean, there is a green version, there's a variegated version. I found that the variegated string of pearls, the actual pearls tend to be on the smaller side. I assume it's because the actual variegated version has a lot of white, so it has less chlorophyll in it, and chlorophyll is what plants use to actually capture sunlight and produce energy for the plant. And so the variegated version, I find that naturally it has smaller sort of leaves, and so, or smaller pearls. So that could be just the reason, it's just the type of string of pearl. The other reason is that it could be from not getting enough light, and the other reason is that it's not getting fertilizer. Now, succulents are quite hardy. They actually don't need that much fertilizing, but when it's a long period and hasn't been fertilized, I've noticed that those pearls will actually become smaller and smaller just because it doesn't have nutrients. Because in the end, all plants do need some form of nutrients. So for my string of pearls, if I'm noticing that those pearls are small, then I'm going to give it an extra boost of fertilizer. I either use slowly release succulent or cacti fertilizer in the soil, or I use a well-balanced liquid fertilizer, but I always halve the dosage. The reason why I halve the dosage is that I don't want to over-fertilize my plant, and over-fertilizing a plant can actually burn the roots and cause damage to the plant. So that's why I tend to reduce the concentration by 50% on what the manufacturers recommend. I also tend to fertilize my string of pearls once every 3 months, so just at the start of each season, and I found that's really helpful to produce those big plump pearls. I also noticed that some of the pearls, when it starts to grow, when it's an immature pearl, it tends to be starting off smaller, and then it grows into a bigger pearl. So if you're noticing it's a young pearl, it's a new one that's starting to grow, they tend to be smaller than the older mature pearls as well. Now, if you're noticing that you have lack of growth, there's not much pearls, there's not much strings occurring, then it's generally a sign that it's either lacking sunlight or lacking fertilizer. So adjusting the sunlight and the fertilizing condition really helps to promote the plant to grow better. I haven't noticed any issues with the cold. I mean, most plants, if it is cold, it tends to slow down, but I found with my string of pearls, it's still growing in winter, and I grow string of pearls not just indoors but outdoors as well, and I found that it slows down, but there is still some growth happening. So if you're finding that your string of pearls is not growing at all, change the light condition and give it extra fertilizer to give that extra boost. If you're finding that your string of pearls, the actual stem, the stem has gone black, mushy, that's a sure sign of root rot. And so check your roots, and root rot in general is from overwatering. And so check the roots and do those things to get rid of the root rot, which I explained previously. If you're finding that your pearls, string of pearls, well, they are succulent. They do love sunlight, I found. But if you're finding that your string of pearls, there's actually, instead of being green or the variegated white and green, it's actually going brown. but it's not mushy or anything, it just looks a bit burnt. Well, it's most likely it has been burnt, because the time that I noticed that occurring is that when I've moved my string of pearls from an area where it's receiving it hasn't adapted to the high intense direct sunlight, and it's actually kind of burnt the pearls. So what I did once is that I moved my string of pearls, which was indoors. It was a south facing window, so it was still getting direct sunlight, but direct sunlight in the home is still a lot less than direct sunlight outside. So what I noticed that when I moved my string of pearls from indoors to direct sunlight outside, the pearls, the very top part of the pearls, that actually became brown and looked burnt. And that's because I think it did get burnt because it didn't acclimate to actually the higher light intensity. So if you do find that you are going to move your string of pearls to a higher light, not so much a problem indoors but more outdoors, then maybe acclimate it first. So move it in an area where, yes, it's receiving a little extra light compared to indoors, and then next month move it to another area where it's receiving direct sunlight but not direct sunlight all day, and then finally another month later pop in an area where it's receiving direct sunlight all day, and you won't notice the issue of the pearls burning. If you do notice the pearls are starting to burn though, then you can always bring it back to an area where it's a little bit less light. If you're noticing that sometimes the actual stem, it's broken off there, well, I found that occurs when I keep on touching my plants, or if you've got kids or animals that tend to knock and touch it and the stem breaks off, because string of pearls, the stems can be delicate sometimes, but not to worry. If you are noticing that, you can actually propagate string of pearls very easily. Just grab that stem, let the ends callus over, so put it aside for about an hour so that the end actually seals up. I don't actually use any rooting hormone. I found that you don't need it. All I do is I pop that stem at the top of the soil, making sure the pearls are facing up and not down in the soil. It needs to face up in the upward direction to make sure that the roots grow downwards and the pearls are actually up and not going to rot when watering the plant. Once that's done, just give it a little bit of extra soil, and you'll notice over time that those stems are actually going to grow new roots, and you're going to have a new string of pearls. And that way, it's also a great way to actually make your pot more full as well. And if you don't want to put that extra stem into your mother plant, you can also just put it into a new pot with new soil and grow a new lot of string of pearls. And that's really the best way I found to actually propagate string of pearls. If you're finding that your string of pearls, the actual top part is getting a bit bold, what I mean by that is you may have super full, super tight, super lush string of pearls on the side of the plant, but the top, there's not much pearls, there's like lots of bare stems. I found that the reason for that is that the actual plant is not getting enough sunlight on top of the plant. It might be getting a lot of sunlight on the side, but not actually top. So what happens is that the plant focuses its energy and its new growth to the area where it's receiving more sunlight, because that's where it can capture more sunlight to produce more energy. So then it doesn't grow as many pearls on top. If you're noticing that, pop in an area where your string of pearls is getting direct sunlight at the top of the plant. You can also fix it by propagating, so cut some stems, pop at the top, making sure the pearls are upwards and backfilling it with soil. So then that way, over the time, the actual top of the plant looks more full and more lush, and it doesn't look bold. Now, if you're finding that when you repot a string of pearls, I found that string of pearls, the best container to repot it is a container that's not really deep. I found that string of pearls, their root system isn't that deep. They actually prefer a pot that's actually wider because they like to grow along the soil. And I found that that's the best way to best pot to use for a string of pearls. And you can use something like a terracotta pot, but a terracotta pot, you're just going to have to water the plant more. I found for myself anyway, the best pot to use is just a nursery pot, but making sure that it's actually wide rather than deep, because I found that when it was deep, the roots never grew to the very bottom of the pot, so it's a waste of soil, and also I don't think it really helped the plant to grow. I found like a more shallow pot but a wide shallow pot was the best way to grow a string of pearls. And my soil mixture that I use, I find that string of pearls, they do like a well-draining soil mixture, but also a soil mixture that does retain some moisture in it. So my soil mixture is quite simple. It's 50% cacti soil, 50% potting mix, and a few pieces of horticultural charcoal in it. And I mix it all up, and that's what I use as my soil mixture. I found that if I use just cacti soil from the stores, it's just too well draining. Like it just didn't hold enough moisture for my plant to actually gain some water. And then if I use just potting mix without putting anything else, it was retaining too much moisture, and it was actually rotting the roots or rotting the actual stems or the pearls on the plant. Sometimes you will notice that the actual pearls will drop off. If you've seen just a few, I wouldn't worry about it. It could be the fact that it's a more mature pearl and it's not a... Sometimes you will notice that the actual pearl might drop off. Now, if it's an older, mature pearl and a few drops off, that's a normal cycle of a leaf. It's done its job, it's captured the light, and it's produced energy for the plant, and it's just worn out, and so it drops off and dies. But if you're noticing that it's the younger, new growth of pearl, or you're noticing all of a sudden a lot of pearls are dropping off, the most common reason why I find this is that it's from overwatering, and it's put the plant into such a shock because the roots are most likely rotten, and it's actually under stress, and the actual pearls will drop off. The other time I find that is that it could be a pest issue. So I found that with string of pearls, the main pest I've seen is not spider mites or thrips, but it's more mealybugs and also aphids. I've seen them attack string of pearls, and they actually, there's infestation happening very quickly. And infestation with a pest, it's also an indication that the plant is not happy, which means that the plant might be under stress, it's weak, and so these pests will actually attack it. So if you do find that you have a massive pest infestation with your string of pearls, try to improve the condition. So try to improve the lighting. Maybe even though string of pearls can actually adapt to the cold, maybe just give an extra boost of warmth just to help it out, and also treat the pests as well. And so with when it comes to the things like mealybugs and thrips, my first step in general is to use a garden hose and wash it all way, and wash the plant away from your other plants so you don't spread the infestation. So wash it thoroughly, not just on the strings but the pearls. Make sure everything is washed to try and get rid of it, the pest, as quickly as possible, because when it comes to especially mealybugs, they're very sneaky. They can hide in little crevices, so you want to do a really thorough wash of the plant. If I'm finding that it's a big infestation, I will also use Eco Pest oil, and I will spray all over the plant. But once I spray it, I'm going to put it in the area where it doesn't receive direct sunlight at all. The reason for that is this insecticide is an oil, so it's more likely, well, the plant's going to be more susceptible to burning, especially direct sunlight. So I'm going to put in an area where it's going to still receive plenty of light, but more indirect sunlight. So the sun is not actually beaming directly on it. It's more like kind of like a bit more in the shade. If you're finding that your string of pearls, especially like the variegated version, there's not much variegation in it. So it has more green rather than the white that we want in a variegated string of pearls. And this also applies to string of watermelon. And with string of watermelon, when there's really good variegation, you actually see the pattern of the red stripes on the actual watermelon, which gives it its name because it looks like a watermelon. And also the ruby necklace. If the ruby necklace, if it's in the area where it's not receiving enough sunlight, it will look more green rather than that deep, intense red. So this applies to those string of plants as well. It means that it's definitely lacking light. So plants will produce more green pigmentation, which is the chlorophyll, when it's receiving less light. And with the variegated plants, when it's receiving a lot of sunlight, then it will produce more of the variegated colors that we love. So this is what I've learned while growing string of pearls, and this applies to string of plants as well. So these are the tips I've learned while growing string of pearls, and this applies to the other string of plants as well. If you have any tips of your own, I'd love to read about in the comment section down below. And as always, if you have a question for me, leave it in the comment section down below and I will get back to you. If you did enjoy the content, don't forget to help your crazy plant lady out by hitting the likes button and subscribing to the channel. And if you want to know how to propagate a string of sprays, watch this video here. I'll see you in the next video.